What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we are going to be going over more saving and loading behavior. In this episode specifically, we're going to be covering saving and loading of our news entries, which is this initial menu that you see this pop up when you come into the game, to relay news to the user and updates or patch notes. Additionally, we are going to save out our match history as well. So when we come into our game, you'll see the profile and we go to our match history. You'll see we have no match history. Obviously, I've played matches before in this game, and so we want to save them out so that when we load into our profile, we see that our match history is there from previous play sessions. So we're going to go into our game and we're going to play a match. Right now we have our saving behavior happen at the end of a match, so we have to play through an entire one, make sure we see it saving, then at that point we can test the loading. So come in here, I will defeat this enemy as fast as I can, just using a few different moves that I have. At this point we've defeated our enemy. When we go back to the main menu, we will be able to go to the profile, check out the match history. You'll see that it's been filled out with the proper information. Once we verify that's working, we can then exit the game, load it back up. The news entry should not pop up. You'll see that it does not. And then if we go back into the profile and look at the match history, you'll see that it is filled out as it should be from the game that we just played that was saved out. So that's what we're going to be covering in today's episode. If you want to get caught up in the entire series so you can see how we've done things in the fighting game from hitboxes, online multiplayer, and AI foundations, feel free to click this link in the top right corner, which is an iCard to the entire fighting game tutorial playlist. Alternatively, if you're interested in the saving and loading, but you don't care about the fighting game in particular, that's fine. You don't need to watch the entire series to implement these methods. I'll link you to the first episode of saving and loading right here so you can see how we set up the save game object, because we're going to be expanding upon that method today. With all that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series, but we're going to be doing everything in the code today. So first things first, let's go into Visual Studio and into the code. In the code, we want to go to savegamedata.h. This is our save game object where we hold all of our data that we plan to save out and load in. So previously in the series we had everything shown here. Currency, sound effect volume, music volume, preferred round time, preferred number of rounds, preferred infinite round time, and unlocked items. I'm adding two new variables in here today. News entries and match history entries. So news entries is going to be an array of all news entries by index on this save file. We're going to track booleans in an array, and if the boolean is true, we have read it. If the boolean is false, we have not read it. Very similar to our unlocked items. So t-array of bool news entries, and I've made it uProperty of visible anywhere, just in case we want to visualize it in the blueprint, following along with all the other uProperties I have in here. Now, the other one is match history entries, which isn't type bool, it is of our actual match history entry type, because the match history entry isn't as simple as have we unlocked this? Have we read this? Instead, it has to take in characters that were on each team, the winner of the match, the type of match that it was, and so we need to actually save out the entire struct. So t-array of f match history entry, which is a structure we define in our game instance, match history entries. Again, I've made it uProperty of visible anywhere. Now, if we scroll up to the top, we need to add an include to actually get that structure, because it's in our base game instance.h. fmatch history entry, but we won't be able to access it unless we include that file. So savegamedata.h, I put it right above my savegamedata.generated.h include. I've included basegameinstance.h. Once I have that, my savegamedata type is set up with everything that we need. So let's go to savegamedata.cpp and let's fill out these two new variables that we've made. So we have unlocked item.setNum0, and I'm just following along with that method. We're going to set newsentries.setNum to be 0, because when we start out, our default value is there are no news entries in this array. When we load them in, we'll load through all the news entries in the game and determine if they were read or not, but the very default values for all these variables is going to be 0. Same for match history entries. First time we load up the game, the default value without loading anything in is going to be 0. So match history entries.setNum 0. Once you have this set up, we can go into the base game instance.cpp and scroll down to where we're saving our game. In here, we were displaying the save icon, seeing if we could find the slot to save to. So we're loading the game from the slot at this name, which is our default name. Right now, we only have this one that we're saving to and loading from. And assuming we were able to find that file, then we get a save game object. So if that variable was valid, we were going through and setting all the values we wanted to save out to the variables that we have in our game that represent what we're saving out. So if it's currency we're saving out, we want to take the player's total currency. If it's the sound effect volume, we're going to take the game instance sound effect volume, music volume. For unlocked items, it was a little bit different because we had to update the key array that we're going to save out to match the unlockables.num. Once we had set the size of the unlocked items array in the data to save object, we were copying everything from the unlockables array in the game into the data to save object, and then logging that out. We want to do the same thing for our news entries, so we're going to set the number of not read or read values to save, and to do that we're going to take our data to save object, get news entries on it, and set num news entries.num. This news entries.num is the news entries from the base game instance.h. This is an array of all the news entries in the game. So if we have 34 news entries that we want to be able to display to the users, then this would be a size of 34. So we're just making the sizes equal. That way we can copy over the data appropriately. Now that the size is correct, the next thing we want to do is copy the data over. So we're doing a standard for loop for integer I equals 0, I is less than data to save, news entries.num ++ I. Loop through all the news entries in our data to save object. Then go through each one at index I and set it equal to news entries at index I was read. Very similar to the unlockable data. So if news entries at index I was read, then data to save object news entries at index I is going to return true. If was read was false, then we're going to save out false. I've also copied over the log for this one just so we can test it out if we want. So UE log temp, warning, so it's that yellow text, and then a text macro. News data has been saved for index %d, which means %decimal, and I'm passing in index I. As it copies over each entry from the game instance to the data to save object, we'll print this out for each index. We want to do the same thing for our match history entries. So the first thing to do is to update the size of match history entries array that we're going to be saving out. So data to save match history entries.setNum, and we want to set it to the match history entries.num of the game instance. So base game instance match history entries. This is an array of all the match history entries. And so if we have more than when we initially loaded into the game, we have to readjust that size. But that data can become very big very quickly, so we likely want to limit the number of matches that we can record in our history. So if we go back to basegameinstance.cpp, that's what this is doing. Now we have to copy the data over from game instance match history entries to data to save match history entries. So standard for loop, integer I equals 0, I is less than data to save match history entries.num, increment I. We say data to save match history entries at index I equals match history entries at index I. So basically just copy them directly over to the data to save object. Since these types are exactly the same, f match history entry, then we don't need to go down to the individual variables. You could if you want. You could go say is team 1 winner and set it equal to match history entries at index I dot is team 1 winner. Then I have a log for this one as well. Another UE log temp, warning, text. Match history data has been saved for index %d, and then passing in I. Then we were actually saving the game. So now we have to load this data back in. Saving it out is one thing, but loading it in is another. So let's go to load game. We have our data to load object, which is just another uSaveGameData object. We're loading the same game, but this time we're going to update the values on the game instance from what's in data to load. Basically take the cache data and set our current data to those cached values. So after we set our currency, sound effect volumes, all that good stuff, we were doing the same thing for the unlockables. This time, we were only updating the unlockables.setNum if the unlockables.num was less than the data to load unlocked items. So basically, if the cached data was bigger than the unlockables data in the game instance, we were updating the game instance unlockables data. The reason for this is we don't want anyone to lose data. So if this value is less, possibly an improper value like 0 on a file that's not empty, we don't want to clear all the unlockable data. So in this case, I'm actually not updating the num. Once we had the number set up, then we were looping through all of our unlocked items and setting the game instance unlockables i.isUnlocked equal to the data to load unlocked items at that index. And that was making sure the game instance had all of our saved out values loaded back in so that we start right where we left off. We want to do the same series of events for the other two arrays. So we have our news entries array. So we need to set the number of not read or read values to load. So if newsentries.num, this is the game instance one, is less than the data to load newsentries.num, then we want to update the news entries by calling setNum and passing in the data to load newsentries.num. So basically, if the data we're loading has more entries than the current news entries in the game instance, go ahead and update the value. Then we have to copy the data over, so we're doing a standard for loop. For integer I equals 0, I is less than data to load newsentries.num, increment I. Taking the game instance, news entries at index I, dot was read, and setting equal to the data to load news entries at index I. Remember, this is an array of booleans, so if this value at this index in the array is true, then was read will be true. If this value is false, was read will be false. Then we have a UE log temp, warning, text macro, news data has been loaded for index %d, passing in I. Now we have to do the same for the match history entries. So if match history entries.num, the game instance one, is less than the data to load for the match history entries on the save game object here, then we want to update the size. So match history entries.setNum, we're passing in the data to load match history entries.num. Basically, if the instance size is less than the data we're loading size, update the instance size. Then after that, we just have to do another for loop to copy the data over. So for integer I equals 0, I is less than data to load match history entries.num, increment I. Then we take match history entries.I, this is the instance match history entries, set it equal to data to load match history entries.I. The types are exactly the same, so we just copy all the data from the loaded data into the game instance data. Then we print it out, UE log temp, warning, text macro, match history data has been loaded for index %d, passing in I. Anyway guys, that's all I got for you today, so thank you so much for watching this video. If it helped you, please subscribe and consider supporting the channel further through Patreon, YouTube membership, or Discord subscriptions. Those get you a lot of benefits, so I definitely recommend checking them out, and I really appreciate all of those who have. If you ran into any problems following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There's a link in the description, and all that support is completely free. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.